Thank you. Press record. I always forget about that. Yes, so we talked about why that was a potentially a pitfall, a way to go that would have a lot of pitfalls in it. And then we built an authentication mechanism in a web application with Clerk. We implemented that system. And it seemed like by the end of the class, many folks are able to go into the web application, have a little protected page show up, and everything was great. So we're going to continue on from there today. So we're going to sort of start at the same point we left off yesterday. And we're going to move on now to how you would get this to work with a web server. So keep in mind, everything we've done today so far, or sorry, not done today, done yesterday so far, has been in a front-end web application in your web browser. But of course, like that's only kind of half of what you've talked about. There's also the whole server piece and all that. So we're going to touch on that stuff today. Okay. So let me share my screen here. So day 2 is going to be server side. Exciting. So the primary problem here we're going to be solving today is when you communicate from your front-end web application to the server, how do you communicate to the server that you are authenticated to do a certain action when you want to do that action? So if you imagine, like going back yesterday, I talked about like that like social media example where you were creating posts. If you're making a request to a server as like a user in a web application, you've like typed up your post, you press post, you need to send that to the server for that post to sort of be acknowledged, for it to be written to a database most likely. And somehow you've got to tell that server, A, you've got to give it all the information, but that's pretty straightforward. I mean, you include that in the request. We talked about that way back when I was teaching before. But you also have to tell the server who is making that post, because the server needs to know, A, like how are you authenticating, like what user are you, but then B, can you do that thing? And the way we're going to sort of accomplish this task is something we actually touched on back when I was teaching last, sending tokens. So for those who maybe don't remember or want a bit of a review, we talked about tokens back when I was teaching networking previously. And I actually linked to the slide. I should also actually mention, this is the same slides from yesterday. I'll post the link in the chat in case folks want that. Just that should be good there. Okay, cool. So if you were to click on this link, you can take a look, jump back to the slides from like months ago when I talked before on this particular topic. But we're going to quickly go through it again just as a bit of a review. So a token is a unique identifier that's pre-generated by the server or the people who manage the server. And it's a value that when you include in a request, you're able to prove that you are who you say you are. So think of it like a password, where it's like something you like both sides, the server and the client, they both know that thing. The client can send that to the server, send that token to the server. And when the server receives that token, it can check to see if that matches the token it expects. And if it does, great, everything's good. If it doesn't, oh, okay, I guess you're not like you aren't who you say you are, and it'll give you an error when you make that request. Probably some kind of 400, like a 401. In general, there's a lot of things tokens sort of unlock as one who manages a server. But today, we're going to be talking about authentication and authorization. But they also like will help with like rate limiting, another one. So if you have a bunch of users that are like all making requests and they're all using different tokens, you can disambiguate which users are making which requests and do things like only allow a certain user to make like 100 requests per second. So they do other things as well, but today we're mostly going to be talking about them in the context of authorization and authentication. Okay. So in order to use a token to make a request from our application, like working our way back here, we need a server. Like we got to have that piece in order to make a request to the server. So we're going to make a server. I am not sure how Max has broached this with you folks in the past. So I'm going to go through how I would probably do this. And if you are like, wait, Max did it a different way, let me know and we'll sort of adapt on the fly. So this is another thing where I'm going to just be doing this here, and I'd like you to follow along if at all possible. My VS Code live share session from yesterday is still active. So let me see if I can find the link for that in here. Yes. So it's the last link before what Max posted. That should still be active. But I'm gonna work on the server in here in a moment. But first, we sort of got to just like set everything up. So I'm gonna open up a terminal. I actually got my terminal here from yesterday, and I'm gonna actually take that back. I'm gonna start in VS Code because I didn't want to use crazy terminal commands. I want to make sure you folks understand what I'm doing here. So I'm just going to, in this React portfolio directory, make another directory. I'm just going to call it, oh, not an SRC, out here. Out here. There we go. I'm going to call it backend. Okay. So now once I've got this, I'm going to cd into that backend directory. So now I've got this backend active in my terminal here. And then to sort of set up my new node project, I'm going to run npm init yes, which I think is something that you're probably familiar with from dealing with Max. It's going to sort of initialize for you a new package.json file with just a bunch of default data in it. And then I'm going to install these packages here, which probably these should look familiar to you. I think you've used all these in the past: Express, Cores, and PG. So I'm going to pause here for a second, wait for everyone to sort of catch up. Let me know if you have any questions, but at this point, you should just have like a directory with package.json and these 3 dependencies installed. You can't join the live share. Okay, let me stop it and restart it then. Maybe I screwed something up at some point here. I guess that stop it? Yeah, okay. I think that's what I want. Yeah, okay. Now if I go over here and I paste that in there, give that link I just pasted a try. There we go. Excellent. So Taylor, it says it's giving you an error. Let me click on it myself and see what it gives me. Okay. Yeah, I guess I don't know if I know enough to help you troubleshoot what's going on there. um, okay, cool. Corbin says, are we using Postgres tonight? We are using Postgres tonight. Yes. We're not going to be using SQLize though, just because to be very transparent, I'm not super familiar with it. We're not going to do very much database stuff, just like a little bit. I think we're going to do like maybe 2 selects and 1 insert. Okay. So would I be able to get some reactions in Zoom, some thumbs ups if folks are at this point are all set up? Okay. Seeing at least a couple thumbs ups here. So unless I hear otherwise, I'm going to keep moving forward. Okay. So our next step, speaking of Postgres, is we're going to add a new database. So typically in Careers in Code, we're using this tool called Beekeeper Studio to do a bunch of database management. So what I'm going to do, I've got it downloaded here. If you could open it up, make sure you have Postgres running, sort of get everything all set up. I think Postgres is, you've got it all installed by default in your computers at this point. And once you do, you need to create a new database. So I'm going to call this database auth, A-U-T-H, and click add. Okay. Just to confirm and to make sure like I'm not missing something, everyone does have Postgres installed and everything's all good on that front, right? Like we don't need to go through how to set all that up or anything like that. Okay, I'm gonna assume that means everything's all good. um, okay. After you've made your database, I've got a little bit of example code here we're gonna start with. I'm just gonna take this, copy it, go over into VS Code. Oh, and then inside of my backend directory here, I'm going to make a new file called server.js. Just paste everything in. So I do want to call out here that we're using PG and we're going to be connecting to a database called auth here. So that's why I had to make the database first. We're going to be using that a little bit later. But all this code's doing, though, initially is I'm requiring some stuff just to have some modules available in my code. I'm creating a new server with Express. I'm including core support and I'm including JSON parsing support with Express. I'm connecting to a database. So this is all just sort of like setup stuff, not all that important. And then I've got a single route here at slash. I'm going to make a request to slash. I'm going to return back with this JSON, the key of OK and the value of true. Just like something to start with, kind of like our hello world here, little kind of example. And then I'm running this on port 8000. So after I get that set up here, I can just go. So I had said use this nodemon tool. I think you're all familiar with this. To kick this off, you can run node server.js. You want to run your script. Oops. That's all. And then there you go. Got our local host 8000 server all spun up and running. Okay. I'm going to pause here and give folks some time to kind of catch up here, get to where we need to go. I've gone through here steps 1 through 4 in the slides. So Plosh asked, did you also create a GitHub repo? I didn't for this. You're welcome to. And I just put it for kind of ease of sharing, so I could have one where is it? There we go. One VS Code window with everything in it. I just put this backend directory here just in with this. You're welcome to put this anywhere you want. It doesn't have to be in the same directory. So if you want to make it its own repository, you'd probably put it like not in the same tree. So Corwin, you said okay, true. I guess what's your question about that? Just asking like why I
No,
did that?
no. Like that's what's supposed to show up, right?
Yep,
Like,
that's what's supposed to show
okay.
up. Yeah, it should look like this, or mine's kind of formatted a little bit nicer, but it should have the same sort of content. I'm also, as well, just so I can have both these running, I'm going to make a new tab in my terminal. And I'm going to, oh, already there. I'm going to run my front end app from yesterday in here. So I'm going to have them both running here just so that we can have them both going. So you probably want to do that too as well, because we're going to have things where we want our front end app to communicate with the server and kind of back and forth. Okay. Anybody have any difficulty, any questions? Am I good to move on? Okay. Seeing a few thumbs ups. Okay. I'm going to take that as we can move on. Oh yeah, verify things work. This is what you should see. Assuming you don't have the fancy extension I've got to do the formatting. Oh, Danny, you've got your hand raised.
Hi, Ryan. So,
Hi.
I don't know, something is going wrong with mine. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, yeah, go for it.
When I install this, I don't know, something looks wrong, and I just don't know what I did wrong.
Yeah, so it looks like you got to npm in front of the command. You just have it where it says install -s. You've got to do npm install -s.
Okay, can I just do that again and it won't mess it up?
Yep, yeah, you can just type that all out. So the command you ran there's a command that's built into Max called install. But you just kind of gave it kind of bogus parameters. So it was like, what are you asking me to do? So you haven't done anything wrong here. Just like
Okay.
yeah, or you haven't done anything like bad here.
Anything that I can broke too bad at least.
Yeah, yeah. So you should just be able to stick npm in front of that and it should work fine.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So we've got our little example here working, and I'd imagine so far there's nothing I've done here that is like unusual. I would hope. Like this is all should all be stuff you've talked about with Max so far. So next here is we're going to get into some of the like clerk specific stuff. So we're going to add to our server a new endpoint that when you make a request to it with a token in that endpoint, it will return to you some data. And if you make a request without a token, it will fail to return data. It'll give you back an error. So here's what we're going to do to make that happen. Oh, yeah. Okay. I have a little bit of build up here. So Clerk's got a whole thing, a whole set of tools to allow you to manage and work with tokens, which is great. Great. We don't have to worry about that. We don't have to build our own token validation. If you're building your own system, like with your own username and password flow, your own login, all that sort of stuff, like you would have to build your own mechanism for dealing with this. And it would probably include tokens. You'd probably store your tokens either like in a web browser in something like local storage or in a cookie, or there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. But luckily, we're not going to have to deal with that. Okay, yes. So in order for us to use Clerk's mechanism for generating and dealing with tokens, before we actually write any code, we're going to have to download a file from Clerk's, or download or copy some text from Clerk's web dashboard. Remember yesterday how we had to copy that like publishable key thing from the Clerk website into our application to sort of get the client to sync up with Clerk, so it would know, like, they would both know that they're talking to each other? We're going to have to do something very similar here to get our backend code to be able to talk to Clerk. It's going to be a different value, but it's like a very similar kind of process. So what you're going to need to do here is go to the Clerk dashboard. So hopefully you still have that open from yesterday. If not, you just go to clerk.com and sign in, and it should bring you right to it. And once you're here, you're going to want to scroll down to on the left and go to API keys. It's under the heading of developers. And then once you're at API keys, you're going to want to scroll all the way down and then press advanced. And then keep scrolling all the way down. And then you're going to click PEM public key. So I've got it sort of outlined here. We're going to need to click. So API keys, advanced, and then you want to click PEM public key there. And then what you're going to want to do is click this little button here, this copy button. So what is this? What is this doing? So this value here, this PEM public key value, is what your server is going to need to be able to successfully validate tokens that come from Clerk. So once you've got this value, what I'm going to recommend you do is take this, paste it into VS Code, and save it as a file in your backend folder and call it clerkpublickey.pem. I'm going to do that right now here. So I'm going to go to my backend. I'm going to make a new file, call it clerkpublickey.pem. I'm going to paste this, save it. Okay. So Corwin says, how did you get to that page? This page here? Okay, so if you're on the Clerk homepage here, you log in fresh, you're most likely going to have one application, something like test app, if you called it what I recommended yesterday. If you click on that, you should get to the main page here. On the side, you should be able to go to API keys. That'll bring you here. And if you scroll all the way down, you go to advanced, keep scrolling, and it's going to say JWT public key here, and you're going to want the PEM public key. Take this and then copy that to your clipboard and paste it in where I said. Does that make sense? Cool. Danny, by the way, you still have your hand raised. I don't know if you still have a question or it's just from before, but okay, cool. Corwin says the same application as yesterday, right? Yep, same application as yesterday. We're sort of building on top of what we did yesterday. So think of it kind of as like one big long class with a bit of a split in the middle. Okay. Any other questions or need any more time? Oh, Corwin.
My bad. All right. I got the API keys. Where am I supposed to scroll to again?
Yep. So API keys, scroll down. It's going to say advanced at the very bottom. It's kind of small. Click on advanced. Keep going until you see JWT public key. It's the last box. And then you want the PEM public key value.
All right. I just missed the advanced part.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's kind of hidden. So I should probably put out there here that the way we're doing this is not actually the way that Clerk recommends you do this. And it's because I try to do it the way Clerk recommended for a project at work, and it turned out to be really convoluted and I thought not that easy. So I ended up doing it this way, which worked really well for me on my work project. So I figured this would be much better / easier to teach because I'm a lot more confident in its success. So that's why this is under advanced, because it's a little bit of a slightly unusual way of doing this. But we're going to touch on what it's doing in a second. Cool. Okay, I'm probably going to keep moving forward unless anybody has any questions or wants any more time. Okay. So we're going to need one more library. This JSON Web Token library. I'm going to go over here to my terminal. I'm going to hit Control-C, paste that in, install this package, and run my server again. Okay. And things should still be good here. Shouldn't have broken anything when I did that. Okay. Okay, so here's where the code comes in. I'm going to take this code. I'm going to paste it into my VS Code window. And you can either copy it out of that, or you can sort of type it by hand. I'm going to go section by section and explain what's going on. So sort of 2 bits you got to copy here. There's a couple libraries we need at the very top of our code. So imports, new imports. So I'm going to stick those up there. And then this is sort of the big chunk we're going to need. Okay. So what did I do here? Well, I added these 2 imports. I'm just sort of importing 2 libraries. The FS library you might have encountered before. It's a library in Node that allows you to read files from the file system and write files to the file system and just do file system stuff. So this is how we're going to read this clerk public key.pem file. And this JWT library here, this JSON Web Token library, is a library, the custom library we installed. It's going to allow us to verify that the token is valid. I'm not going to get in too much into the underlying idea of like what's going on here, what a JSON Web Token is, unless folks are really curious. It's not too relevant for what we're talking about today. But really what's important to know is like has token in the name. It's a type of token. It's like a subtype of a token. And it's the sort of type of token that Clerk uses whenever you're generating tokens via its token generation mechanism. Okay. So I'm just going to walk through the endpoint here bit by bit. Actually, before I do that, I do want to mention one thing. So you'll notice that the way I've structured this is in a particular sort of way. I've got like a line of code, then I've got like an if statement where I'm checking to see if something is true. And if it's true, I'm doing some sort of returning some sort of error and then returning out of the function. You're going to see like a bunch of these blocks. Like that's one of them. This is one of them. This is one of them. This is one of them. So this is a strategy you can often use when writing functions. And it can result, at least in my opinion, in like very easy to understand logic if you sort of do it correctly. Of course, this is like a style thing. It's sort of everyone's got their own opinion. But it's sort of something I want to introduce you to because I've gotten a lot of success out of this sort of strategy. So what I'm doing here is I'm getting my authorization header from the request. So request header is authorization. And this is going to give me that as a string. And then I'm going to check, is this header set? If this header isn't set, then I'm going to give the user back an error. I'm going to say, give him back an error, give him back a 401. So in 401 means unauthorized. I'm going to say that the header was not specified. And I'm going to return. So below this if, at this point, I know header is set. It's like something the user specified in their request. I don't have to handle the case anymore of that header not being set. So, okay, great. The header is set. So now I'm going to take my header and I'm going to split it into words. So I'm going to call out split on it. And header parts is going to be an array of every word in the header. So in the case where typically the way you structure a header is going all the way back to when I was teaching previously, you have like the scheme and the value in that header. So what I'm doing here is I'm able to like extract those out. I'm able to get the scheme, I'm able to get the value at the end. But like I need to check, okay, so I've got like, are there two words in what I just extracted out? Is there a scheme and is there a value? So that's what I'm doing here. If header.parse.length is not 2, then no, there wasn't 2 words. So I'm giving back an error. I'm saying the header was malformed. It expected 2 words, but it actually found this many words. Other thing I'll maybe mention here real quick is that like the way I'm writing these error messages is very intentional. So I'm not just writing like error. You can do that, but yourself in like a few days to like a few months of time, like some point in the future, your future self's going to be like, why do you not give me any information about why this failed? Because you're going to be troubleshooting this thing. And it's really helpful to know why things go wrong. So I tended to err on the side of making my error messages as verbose and like contain as much information as possible, because it's going to make my life easier in the future. You also see here, I have this pattern that I follow a lot where I'll say like, if I've got an error and it like went, like the error was raised for a certain reason, I'll say in the error, like, this is what was expected I got, but I actually got this value. So what that's telling me is just reading that error message, I already, like, it's not just like X went wrong. That's fine, but it's like X went wrong because of this reason. So it's like, I've found that this sort of way of writing error messages can be very helpful to sort of like wrap your head around what's going on in like a broader system. So anyway, bit of a tangent there, but I'm raising an error. So I'm returning an error back. I'm giving back a 401 because that authorization header was malformed. Okay, so get down here. So my header parts variable, it's an array, and now has 2 strings in it, like I verified the length. So I'm like going through, I'm slowly validating my data. I'm making sure that everything's set up properly. So I'm going to check if the scheme is the first value in that header parts, the first word in that header, bearer. If it isn't, then I'm going to sort of be like, no, okay, I was expecting it to be bearer, but I actually got back this thing. Okay, so if it's bearer, then I know that the second value in there, that's where the token goes. So I'm going to pull that token out, and I'm going to check, was the token even specified? Was like that token just like empty? If it was empty, then I'm going to give back an error because the token's got to have like a length. It's got to be set. So after I've gone through all this code here, I've sort of validated that like everything looks roughly okay. Like everything passes like the gut check. There's nothing that's like obviously wrong with this header. And I've also extracted out my token. So I've got that as a string. And the last part here, this last section, is what's actually going to be doing the token validation. This is like the important part of this. Everything above is largely just like making sure things looked okay. This is like actually doing the validation. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to read this file here from the file system, this clerk public key file. So this is what we wrote before. This has like that value we copied from the clerk servers. And then I'm going to call this jwt.verify function. So this jwt was imported from this JSON Web Token package, which is what we installed before with that npm install command. And when I run this, I'm going to give it my public key, and I'm going to give it the token. And what it's going to do is it's going to verify to make sure that my token is valid. And if my token isn't valid, it's going to throw an error. So notice how I've got this in a try catch. So I'm assuming you're familiar with try catch. If you're not, let me know. But if it's going to throw an error, if it doesn't validate properly, and you'll see here, it's going to like give back a 401 back to the client if it doesn't validate properly. It's also going to print out of the console like the exact error we got, just so you have information for troubleshooting and all that. And then again, follow this pattern where I return here. So return in each of these spots. And then if I get down to this point, like the token validated successfully. So validated successfully, and I'm going to return back a successful status message. So in this case, what this endpoint is doing here, I called it secret word. And what it's going to do is it's going to give a secret word. So you have to be logged in to see the secret word. If you're not logged in, you can't see it. So that's kind of the idea behind what the endpoint's doing here. Okay. Any thoughts on that? Any questions? Okay. So I've got my server running here, and as I was saving it, it was live reloading. So if I go back over here and refresh my web browser, things should still be okay, because I'm still making a request to that / endpoint. I'm not making a request to that secret word endpoint. Corwin, you asked, where do you put your key? So you're talking about the clerk public key file? Okay. Yep, so you want to put it into, where is it over here? clerkpublickey.pem. Really though, this and the file you're reading here have to line up. So if you copy my code, that's the file name I used, but you gotta have them reading from the same place. Okay. So we're gonna pull open Postman and we're gonna try to make a request to this thing and see what happens. Okay. I'm gonna make a request to localhost 8000, secret word. And I'm not going to include anything other than that. So I've got my my host name, my port, my path, my method, no custom header. So importantly, no authorization header here, and no body to get requests. I wouldn't include that anyway, but just going to make a request to this just on its own. Not going to let me collapse that. Okay, whatever. Oh, there we go. Okay. And then when I press this send, you're going to see it gives us back a 401. Authorization header not specified. So what happened here? So it made a request to our endpoint here. It checked to see if the header was there. The header wasn't there, so it gave me back this error. Okay. So let's sort of like see if we can get a little further. Like maybe I'll go over to here and I'll add an authorization header. And I'll set it to just be like test or something. Okay. Okay, so it looks like it got a little bit further. So this time it tried to split that into 2 words, and it was like, oh, wait, I can't do that. Expected 2 words, just found 1 word. Makes sense. Maybe I'll go like test second. You can see here, as I go down, it's going to hit each of those cases. It's going to give you a nice message telling you what exactly went wrong here. So let's sort of make it pass something like this. So like assuming token was like the token, it would get through all those checks. So now it's going to say invalid token. So it's failing here on this last bit. So it's trying to validate the token and it's failing. If I go back over to my JavaScript console, it's going to say, I guess the error that the JWT library gave was JWT malformed. Okay, so I guess that wasn't a very helpful error, but it gave you an error. It told you sort of what was wrong. Okay. So before I move forward, any questions? Anybody want me to pause for a moment so you can catch up a bit?
Yeah, the last step you did went over my head. Sorry.
With which last step?
Starting Postman.
Ah, okay. So I went into Postman and I made a request to this endpoint we just created. The live share Corwin should be in Slack, the most recent message. So HTTP localhost 8000 secret word. So I'm making a request to this endpoint. And I guess really the thing I'm trying to emphasize is this isn't working. Like I'm making a request. I'm getting back a 401. And I'm getting back a 401 because my token didn't validate. And then more importantly than that, like I didn't even get through all these checks to start with at the very beginning. So if I were to specify an authorization header here with a valid token, which we're going to do in a second, like if I were to go through all put everything in the right spot and click send, this token would give me back a successful response. But we don't have a token yet. We can't do that yet. So it's not going to give us back a successful response. But importantly, it's working. Like we have the endpoint, it's giving us back a 401. It's not like a 404. It's not just like failing outright. So we're making progress. Danny.
Mine is doing a 404. I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah. Okay. Can you go over to your VS Code window? You scroll up a little bit. Okay. You go back over to your Postman window. Go back over to your VS Code window. Sorry, I'm just trying to compare a few things here.
Yep, no problem.
Okay. And can you scroll down a little bit further in your VS Code window, all the way to the bottom? Very interesting. If you go to a web browser and you go to localhost 8000, does that work for you? You see something there?
Oh, hold on, I gotta move something out of the way, of course. It just says, okay, true.
Okay. If you go to localhost 8000/secret word in a web browser, what do you see?
It says, cannot get /\secret word.
Very interesting. Go back over to Postman again. That looks right. What the heck?
I'm good at those kinds of problems.
Let's see. We've got to get. Can you? So on the right side of your screen, there's the little bar, vertical bar on the Postman window. There's at the very top a little like less than / greater than little like HTML code button. It's gonna let me. Yeah, that one. Click on that and give me a curl.
Just send it to you.
Just that. Send it to me in Slack.
Do you want me to do it in C5 or just right to you?
Doesn't matter.
Okay. I put it in Slack.
Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run this on my end, see if it works for me. Aha, it doesn't work for me, which is very interesting because that is a clue. What is different between that and my curl? 108,000. Okay, and one other thing I'm going to try here just to make sure. Thank you for bearing with me.
No, thank you for helping me because I'm just at a loss.
Okay, here's what I'm going to have you do. If you go over to your VS Code window the very bottom, there's a thing where it says your server.listen 8000. Change that 8000 to 8001. So we're going to have it listen on a different port instead of port 8000.
Okay.
Also, so you don't drive yourself crazy, on line 67, make it so it says listening on port 8001 and not 8000.
Oh, yep.
Yep, cool. So if you save that, and then go down to your terminal and restart your server.
So Control C.
Oh, you know what it also could have been? You maybe didn't restart your server after you made the code changes.
Oh, I don't.
Either way, whatever. This
Yeah.
would fix it either way. Oh, module not found. Ooh, that's exciting. Scroll up a little bit. Let's see what's going on there. Ah, yeah. So you got to install that JSON Web Token package. So if you do in your, we talked about that as a step, but if you run npm install -s JSON Web Token, JSON Web Token is all one word.
Oops.
npm install dash uppercase
God.
s. No big deal.
Oh, good Lord.
Yep. Dash uppercase s space JSON Web Token, all word, one word.
Just like that?
Not a D, a B, web.
Oh, dang it. Good Lord. There we go.
Yeah. Hit enter on that. Excellent. So I bet if you run that npm start command again, it should work now. Okay.
All right.
So now go back over to Postman and hit send on it. See if that works for you.
Send. Reading
Send,
get.
the blue button on the right.
Oh, should I put it to 8001 though, right?
Oh, yeah, that's right. 8001. Yep. Good call.
All right.
Yep, there we go. I bet if you change that
Yay.
back to 8000, it'll work now. I think the issue is you didn't restart your server.
All right. Thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate you.
Yep. Keep in mind, so as a later step, we're going to put some code in our client that says localhost 8000. If you keep it as 8001, you got to make
I'll
sure
have to
to make
change
that
everything.
8001. So they got to line
so
up.
I'm gonna probably just go back and change everything to 8000, make sure I still work. But thank you.
Sounds good. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? Okay. So we've got our initial server here. We've got everything we need to server side to make this work. Now we've got to update our client from yesterday. So we've got a server that can receive a request that needs a token. We've not got to send a request from the client with a token. So remember here, the goal here is to make a request from the client to the server that's authenticated, where the client is making a request and the client is asserting they are somebody. They are a certain persona. And that allows them certain accesses on the server. And in this case, this means they can make a request and get this secret word. So here's how we're going to do that. So this is, keep in mind, we were in the server before. We're not going to move back over to our client from yesterday. So we're going to switch sort of context here to the other application. So I'm going to close my backend here. I'm going to close that, and I'm going to go back over to my client, in particular app.js. So from yesterday, this is where we had like our clerk publishable key stuff. We had that like clerk provider, the protected component, all that stuff from yesterday. So I'm going to import a few new things. The very top of my file, I'm going to import some stuff from the React package. So we have some hooks available globally. You don't have to do like React dot whatever. Just a little bit cleaner if you do it that way. I'm also going to import from the @clerk React package a new thing here. So I'm going to import use auth, another new hook from the clerk React package. So we had a use user from yesterday. Now we've got use auth as well. They do slightly different things. Okay. So then with there's a couple changes we need to make to our component. So I'm going to make these changes as protected signed in component. So remember, this is what was showing that screen yesterday, the like this stuff. So that red text and all that. So this is the component that's visible once you're fully logged in. Oh, wait a second. How did I do that? Oh yeah, I did it like that. Okay. So I just took this bit of code here and I just pasted it in. Let me explain what this is doing. So this is our new code right here. Or actually, I take that back. This is our new code right here. So the first line here is I'm using this hook, this use auth hook from clerk. I'm using that to get this get token value here. So this is a thing built into clerk, and this is how we're going to get the token we're going to send along with our request to the server. The second thing I've got here is I've got this use state hook. So this is I'm just storing this word value, so it's just a string. And this is where we're going to put our secret word after we fetch it. Okay, and then the rest of this is I've got this use effect right here. So this use effect is going to run when the component mounts. And when the component mounts, I'm going to do a few things. The first thing I'm going to do is there we go. Make a request, or not make a request. I'm going to use this get token function we've got from this use auth hook, and we're going to use that to get a token. So just like many of the other things we talked about way back when I taught last, get token is an async, or it's a promise returning function that is async. So I kept the theme here of using .then and all the stuff we talked about way back when I taught last. Max has also mentioned async await, I think, to you. You're welcome to use either. If you want me afterwards, I'll rewrite this with async await just so you can kind of see the difference to see how they compare. But I wrote it with sort of the way that I know you all are familiar with, just to make sure that everyone can understand that. So get token, call this function. So this is what I get out of this use auth hook, this get token value here. This is the function. It doesn't take any parameters. I just call it on its own, and it returns a promise. I'm attaching a .then to that promise, and then once the value shows up in that promise, it's going to call this function, and it's going to give me this token value. This token value here is a string. This is the token we need to include when we make our request to the backend server we just wrote. And importantly, this is something the clerk generated. We don't really have to touch this value. It's like you can treat it as like opaque. Okay. So after that, we now are kind of in here. Once we've got that token value from clerk, we're going to use fetch to make a request. So that request we're going to be making to localhost 8000, so where our server is running, to that secret word endpoint. So in essence here, this right here, this fetch, is what we just did in Postman, only we're also now going to be including the proper authorization header. So I'm including headers, authorization, and the value being bearer, and then our token. So this is sort of in that structure you'd expect with an authorization header, with the scheme and then the value. So this is going to kick off that request to the server, and then the response is going to come back. So we're attaching to the promise this .then here. I'm going to get back this response. And then once this response comes back, I'm going to just check to make sure it came back successfully. So maybe, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there's an OK property on the response. And this is going to be true if it's a 200, basically a 200, 201, 202, any of the 200 class codes, just kind of a nice shortcut. So if it fails, I'm going to print out a log just so that like I know a bit about what happened that I'm going to return out. And then after I've gotten back a response, then I'm going to get that JSON data out of the response. And then again, it's an async function. It's going to call this. And then I'm going to store the word that I got back from the server into the state with set word. So importantly, JSON.data. So that sort of lines up with back over here in my server. where is it? Down here, I'm returning data in the string. So that's sort of why I'm doing the dot data there. Okay. And there's one last thing I got to do down here, and that is I've got to stick this here line down here. So I'm just going to print out my secret word on the page, just so I've got that data shown out. I'm doing something with that state. Okay. So at this point, you should have everything you need to make a request from the web browser authenticated all the way through to all the way through from the front end to the back end with token generated via clerk. Oh, Corwin, you're saying you still can't get the Postman request to work. Let me do this. Let me show this real quick, and then I'll jump back to you. Okay, so if I come back over here and I reload this, oh, it already reloaded. See, we got our secret words showing up there. Kind of exciting. So I will I'll get back to this in a second. I'm gonna go help Corwin. But if you can get all that sort of going there and see if you can get to this point where you've got your page, it's running. Make sure you have your local development server running if you haven't done that. So make sure you got that there. And then you should be able to, it's going to make a request to your backend. It should get the word and have it show up there. And also, if you want, you can go in and can change your word, make it like monkeys, and refresh that, and then reload your web browser. Now another secret word's going to show up. So kind of cool. Anyway, Corwin, you want to share your screen? Okay. So you might be suffering from the same issue that Danny was. If you go back over to your terminal and you restart your process, so hit Control-C and run npm start again, see if that fixes it. There we go. Cool.
Was that what I was supposed to get?
Yep, that's what you're supposed to get. So importantly,
okay.
you're making a request to that endpoint. You're not including a token. You're just making a request to it. So if you're not including a token, you're not providing that proper information to the endpoint, and it doesn't know who you are, so it's going to give you an error.
Okay.
Anybody else have any other questions? How's it going? Would I be able to get some thumbs up or reactions in Slack or reactions in Zoom, excuse me, from folks if you've been able to see that Gorilla's text in the web application, if you've been able to get it to do the whole thing? Just want to see how things are going here. Cool.
Wait. So we took the little we took the token
Mhm.
and like where it says token and like the little blue token, we're deleting that and inserting our token into there, right?
No. What do you mean
We're
by
not doing that.
yeah, I guess like there's really no way for you to manually generate a token like on your computer. Well, there is, but we're not going to be talking about it today. So there's the tokens you're going to be getting are going to be generated via Clerk in the web browser. So that let me share my screen here so I can have a thing to point at. So here, this get token function. This function, when called, is going to return a promise. And when that promise resolves, it's going to resolve with a token. So this variable here, this is going to be a string that is going to contain our token value. And that's going to get substituted in here into the value of our header. So what might actually be helpful here is let me log out this value. We'll go token. That. So what I'm doing here is after I generate the token, I'm logging it out before I make the request. If I go over here and go into my JavaScript console, my inspector, you'll see that I've got here this thing. That's our token. So you see how it's like a long series of random letters and numbers? That's what you're going to see with a token. It's not going to really be much meaning in it. This token's probably longer than average, because that's kind of how JWTs tend to work. But yeah, it's going to look something kind of like that. So what I can actually do here is I could take this token, I could copy it, go over into Postman, and go authorization, bearer, paste, something kind of like that. And then press send. Oh, wait, it's a query parameter. Authorization, bearer, paste. There we go. Send. You see, now we get back the right data. But then if I get rid of this to make it garbage, now it's going to fail. So does that make some more sense? Cool. One thing I do want to also mention, because if you try this exercise, you might run into this. Clerk's tokens have a pretty short expiry time. So the pattern Clerk tends to use, which is, I guess I would say a little unusual, but something that maybe folks are tending to move more towards these days, is all of Clerk's tokens are very short, lived tokens. So a token might be valid for like a minute or two. And then after that, the token expires. And if you want a new token, you've got to generate it again. So what it tends to be is instead of trying to keep one token value kind of around used for a bunch of requests, the way you do it with Clerk is you sort of generate the token right before you make the request. You generate the token fresh each time. And it tends to not really be that big of a performance hit in my experience, and it seems to be pretty fine there. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. So my token just expired. So I clicked send, and now it's giving me back an invalid token thing because my token's no longer valid. It expired. I go back over here. See, JWT expired was the error message. So if I were to come over here, refresh it, get myself a new token and put it in that isn't expired, then now it would work again. Cool. Okay. I'm tempted to keep moving forward here, but I'll admit we're moving a bit faster than I expected. So I probably have another, at the pace we're going right now, like half an hour's worth of stuff to cover. So I was expecting about now is when we take our break. I guess we can do that. But I'm going to be maybe doing a little bit of scrambling over the break to try to get some more stuff, which is fine. But that's what, like, if you have any questions, I really want to leave time open for those if they're there. Otherwise, though, I think probably we can go on break maybe a little early and then hopefully cover the last part of this afterwards. But importantly, like, we've got everything kind of working. Like, the right bits are being sent over the right wires and all that. And you're able to make a request from your client to your server with a token, and the server's validating the token is correct and sending you back data. So everything's cool there. But after the break, we're going to go into a bit more with how you might do some things with databases to store some data, and how you might get back data, like give back data different for different users, and some more exciting things there. So yeah, if there's no other questions, I think probably good for our break. Maybe until like 7:20? Sure. Okay, let's do that. 7:20. See you then. Yet. So bad at doing this. Thank you. All caps is warranted. Okay. So before we get into making our giving back dynamic data from the server and really sort of starting to see some of the power of this authentication mechanism, I did want to quickly jump back over to our application, which seems to have closed. Protected. So I want to go over the network panel. So we talked about this back in when I was teaching previously. But you can actually see the requests that are being made by this web page. And I want to call out that there are some requests here to that secret word endpoint. And you can actually poke around here and see the token in here if you want to. You can see a bit of details about it. You can copy that request as a curl or bring it into Postman. So if you want to see a bit more and understanding what the web page is doing, this might be a good entry point into that. Should have covered that before we went on break, but I forgot. Excellent. Okay. So we're going to start to go down this path of having each user have different data. And the first step to sort of do that is kind of what my thinking was. Let's sort of expand the example we had previously. We're giving back each user the same word. So originally it was gorillas. I changed it to monkeys. But like we're just giving back like a single word for everybody. But that's not really all that valuable. So let's make it a different word for each user. Okay. So we're going to sort of go through this step by step. And I should say before we get into this is one way to do this. There is probably as many ways to do this as there are people who write code. Like everyone's going to have a different way of approaching this, but this is sort of what came to mind to me first. And also conveniently, I wanted to use some tools like databases that you have familiarity with. So I ended up taking advantage of that. But okay. So first step is to sort of add this functionality. I'm going to add an NPM package called random word. So just to show you the documentation for it real quick. Oops. Random word. This is a package that exports a function that when I call it gives you a random word, random English word. So we're just going to use this to generate our words because I want to give each user a different word. So it seemed like that would be a good way to do it. That's all it is. So I'm going to come over here, go to my server. I'm going to hit Control-C. I'm going to paste that in. I'm going to install that package. And start my server. Okay, should be pretty straightforward. Oh, front or back end? Back end. Good question. So I should call out everything we're going to do here is in the back end. Our front end is going to stay the same. So we're still making a request to get that word. And it's just that what the back end's going to return is going to be, it's going to be different, but the request is still the same, the token is still the same, everything in the front end is still the same. Okay. So after you've installed that package in your backend, now we're going to start to deal with the database a bit. So the way I decided to go about doing this is I wanted to make a database table where I'd store information about every user. You'll see in here, there are 3 columns in this table: an ID, the clerk ID. So that is we talked about it briefly yesterday, but clerk gives an ID for every user. And this is like an internal identifier in clerk system. And this clerk ID value is where we're going to store that. So we're going to be able to keep track of, like, we're going to have a relationship between every row in our database and clerk so we can reference them. And then also we're going to have a column secret word, and that's where we're going to store our secret word. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to copy that, go over into Beekeeper here, and now I'm connected to my database. I'm in the auth database we set up before. I'm going to go over up here into my query. I'm going to paste this, and I'm going to run it. And after I run it, I should see on the left here, it should say clerk user. There should be a new table there. So I think you've talked about create table and what this does and all that, but this syntax is not all that important. Really, the takeaway here is that we're making a table with 3 columns in it. Also, I think click on, can you? I don't know. I don't use Beekeeper, so this is all new to me. Do we click into clerk? Corwin, can you explain what you mean by that? Double click. I might need an explanation. Sorry.
Like, no, double click on clerk user.
Oh, there we go. Excellent. Okay. Yeah, you don't, I mean, cool. Good to know you can do that. But once you've made your table, this is the only actual command we're going to run, like SQL command we're going to run in Beekeeper to like set everything up. There's probably a way you can like press plus here and make the table too. I don't know. Like I'm not as familiar with that, but really we need a table with these 3 columns in it. It looks like maybe you can go into here and we can sort of peek at your database later. So this might be a good tool for that, but we're not quite there yet. So all you need to do is run this command and make sure you see the table show up here, but that's all you need to do for now. Okay. So once you've run that command, we're going to add a little bit more code to the server. So I'm going to add this random word package. I'm going to import that into my server. I'm going to come over here to my server. I'm going to stick this import right there at the top. And at the end of my secret word endpoint, I'm going to add a bit more code. Okay. So my new code goes from here to down here. What is this code doing? So there's something we did above that you might have noticed, and that was that this jwt.verify function, the return value of that I stored into a variable called decoded. We didn't use that variable previously. So this is what we had previously. This is what we have now. And the reason why I did that is inside of this decoded variable, there's a value called stub. And this value, it turns out, is equal to the clerk user ID. So what's cool about this is, from line 54 here all the way up to the beginning, this bit of code, let me try that one more time. There we go. That bit of code, after you run all this code, you now know who made that request. You have their clerk user ID. And that's a unique identifier. It's going to be different for every user. So if you know that, now you know who's making the request. You can do things like look up data associated with one single user if you want. And in fact, that's kind of what I'm doing here. So I'm running a couple SQL queries in here. I'm going to quickly walk through what's going on. I also want to call it, I'm using .then instead of async await, just because I know you all are familiar with that. You could, again, convert this to be async await, like I think Max has maybe done more recently. It would do all the same thing. So instead of db.query.then result, it'd be like result equals await db.query. Same kind of idea. So what I'm doing here is I'm making a query, and I'm selecting from the clerk user table, the table we just created. Oh, this should be clerk ID. It's a typo in my code. Ooh, I wonder why I
was
didn't
gonna
catch
tell you.
that.
I was
Yeah.
actually gonna tell you that.
So what I'm doing here is I'm looking for a row in the clerk user table where the clerk ID column in that row is equal to this value that we got from the token. And I'm selecting out the secret word. So I'm trying to get the secret word for a given user. And if I'm able to find a user, if a user's already in that table, I want to respond with their secret word. So looking at result and seeing if there's data that's returned back from that query. And if there was, I'm going to get that first row and return back that secret word, send it back to the front end in the same format, like data. So it's just like before, data gorillas or data monkeys. It's like data, the secret word. So the format that I'm sending has stayed the same. So the front end doesn't have to change. It's still expecting data to be sent in the exact same way. However, though, if their row doesn't exist, if the user's data is not in there, then we've got to add that data. Like right now, our database table is empty. So if we make a request for this for the first time for our user, there's no data returned, there's no secret word there. So we got to populate that data. So that's the other half of this here. So in the else case of this if, I'm going to generate a secret word, and I'm going to insert that secret word into the database table. So insert into clerk user, clerk ID, secret word, clerk ID, secret word. And then I just return back that secret word once it's done. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to save this. And then I'm going to quickly go over here and update this typo just so I don't forget about that. Okay. So at this point, we should have everything we need to make this work. So let's see if it works. I'm going to go over here. You're going to see secret word monkeys. I'm going to refresh the page. Ooh, and it gave me an error. Let's see what went wrong. Column that does not exist. Ah, yeah, I think I know what I did there. Where is VS Code? There's VS Code. I probably need some single quotes around this. I didn't think I did, but I probably do. Let's give that a shot. Oh, one more issue here. Column user that does not exist. I did test this. Let's print out this query, see what this looks like. Looks right. Okay, let's go over into our Beekeeper app over here and try to run this and see what happens. Yeah, it should run okay. That's kind of concerning. Let's come back over here. Clerk ID. Is it because I need a semicolon? I don't think I do. One does not exist. Oh, I know what it is. I think it's down in my insert. So has Max talked to you at all? Like, how deep have you folks gone into SQL with Max? I'm curious. Like, I mean, I imagine like these kind of queries we're kind of able to put together, but have you talked about like, I guess I'm just curious, like, what have you talked about with SQL with Max, just so I can kind of set my bearings right here.
So with SQL, we practiced it on Khan Academy, but we did not do a heck lot in like in VS Code or like embedding queries inside JavaScript and all that. For the most part, just did select star from a table.
Okay, cool. Makes sense. Yeah, so I'll say what I got here, I largely copied out of, I think, something you did last week. There was a backend example Max had where you're doing some pg.query calls in there. So like my goal here was to try to make this not much more complicated than that. So instead of it just being like a single query, I had to have the two queries, but semantically what's going on should be, I think, similar. And it looked like, yeah, there was a little typo in my insert. The reason why I was asking is because I was going to go into a bit as to why this particular error came up, but it sounds like maybe you might not have enough familiarity for it to make sense. That's totally fine. But I think probably I'll just say that was a typo, my mistake, and good thing I caught it when I did it. You want to make sure those aren't smart quotes, though, because I freaking hate smart quotes. You know, I literally have to do a pass on all these slides afterwards, after I write them, to take out all the smart quotes. It takes me like half an hour. Like, it's a nightmare. Anyway. Okay. So, I've got my own secret word here. Let's I'm gonna come over here into my thing here. Okay, yeah, here we go. So we got a row in our database. So ID user ID of 1, this user, that secret word. Excuse me. Excellent. So if I come in here and I maybe change this and be like different word, I think that does the apply. Do I have to do that? Yeah, okay, cool. And now I come over here and I refresh it, different word. So importantly, what it's doing here is it's pulling that from the database. What does that mean? Well, if I here were to sign out, I'm going to come over here to protect it again. And this time I'm going to sign in, but I'm going to sign in with Google. I'm going to sign with my work Google account. Go back over to this protected page. You're going to see now I've got a different word. So what happened there? Well, it made a request that secret word endpoint. And when it got that request, it did that search for that table, and it couldn't find a row that had that new user ID in it. So it ended up inserting a new row with that randomly generated word, and now that's in here. So you can see here how this means that, like, if you were to log into my app, like if you could somehow log in with your Google or GitHub account or whatever on my app, you'd get your own word. So now we're starting to get into this world where you've got data that's shown to each individual user, that's not global. That's, I guess, the takeaway from all this. Any thoughts, any questions?
So, one question.
Yeah.
Is this what we'll be using to generate like a token, kind of like encrypt the password? Is that what's happening here?
So there's not really any password involved in this sort of system. So Clerk's handling all the authentication piece for this whole system. The way that the way this system's using the database is there's a row in this Clerk user table that I've made, and every row is sort of storing data about every user in the system. I called it Clerk user mostly because each one is sort of related to the user in Clerk. I've sort of other systems I've worked on, I found that to be a nice way of doing it, where it's meant that, like, because everything's one-to-one like that, you've sort of got all your Clerk metadata you can store in that table. But you can think of this as just like a list of all the users in the system. And you can store whatever metadata you want in here. I just picked the secret word thing, but you could store like the user's name or their email address. You could differentiate that information. And where it really starts to get more powerful is you can maybe have some relations with this table. So maybe you have like a comment model, and you want to have that comment model be one-to-many with the user. Or so like a user has many comments, a comment has one user. So now you've got a thing where you've got a bunch of comments in the system, and you can figure out, oh, this comment is for this user. And some user could visit like the My Comments page. And when they go to that, they could make a request to get a list of all the comments, and it return back a list of all the comments related to that user. And you know which user it is because you have their Clerk ID from their token. So you can do a query where you can go through the Clerk ID, get that database row, you then find all the comments related to that user, and now you've got a list of all their comments. So this is sort of like we're just scratching the surface on what's possible. And next week, Max is going to sort of expand on this a bit more with you all, and you're going to start to do some more complicated data modeling here with this involved.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So there are a couple other small things I'm going to talk about, but other than that, that's pretty much all I had planned. So let's go through those small things, and then we can talk about what other options we've got for the rest of our time. Okay, so you should see something kind of like this. If everything worked, you should see secret word, but that word should no longer be like the static word. It should be different for a different user account. And you should be able to go into your Beekeeper app and be able to see all their different, if you have logged in with multiple users, you should see their different words. You can change them in line. You can go through that on your own if you'd like. There is one little refactoring change I want to suggest we make, though. So we've got all the token validation happening in our secret word endpoint. Now, there's a thing you can do in Express called a middleware. And this is something that you've been using, but probably haven't realized you've been using. So if I go over here to VS Code, at the very top of this file, you see where you've got all these like server.use things, where it's like server.use cores, server.use express.json. So Max said he hadn't really gotten into with you what these are doing. But what these effectively allow you to do is to run code before every request, like to run code like as a before step before you actually run all the code down below, like all the different route handling code. So why this is interesting is like this cores one here. What this is doing is it receives a request, and it will properly add all the headers to it so that all the core settings that we talked about back in the networking module get set up properly. And you don't have to deal with any of that stuff, which is excellent. This express.json here, what this will do is it will it's a middleware that for every request will parse the body as JSON and expose that body for you under req.body. I think you've probably used with Max a bit. In this application, this doesn't really matter. We're not doing any body parsing or anything like that at the moment, but this is like another middleware. You can make custom middleware. And why this is helpful is if you have something you want to do before every request. Let's like say, for example, you want to like parse the authorization header and like look up the token and decode that information. That might be something you would make a middleware so that you could do it on every request. You don't have to add all this code at the very beginning of each of your routes. You don't have to repeat this over and over. So I'm going to pull this out to make this a middleware. I'm going to show you how you do that. Max said you haven't gotten into this too much. So if you don't understand this, that's fine. Max said he's going to cover it like in the future, I think next week. But we're just going to sort of do this as a refactoring step, and you can ask me any questions if you'd like. So I'm going to take all this code down to, I'm going to go down to here. I'm going to delete all that. And then I'm going to go up here. I'm going to make a new function. What did I call it? Validate user token middleware. Yes. I'm going to put all my code in here. Okay. So I've moved all that to this function. Middleware and Express take 3 parameters. This is like a standard thing you do when you write middleware. They're very similar in a lot of ways to the request handlers you have. So you have like the REQ, RES, request response values. You have those here too. But you've also have a third value, next. What happens is once your middleware is done doing whatever it needs to do, next is a callback, and you call that function next. And that sort of is like return. It's like, okay, my middleware is done, move on to the next thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down here. I'm going to go to the very bottom. And I'm going to write next. Now, there's all these other cases up here where I'm returning. But this I want to actually return, because in this case, I'm returning an error. So if you don't call next, the request isn't actually going to make it to your request handler. It's going to get stopped by the middleware. And in this case, it's kind of what you want. Like, you only want the request to make it down there if you've included the token, if you've configured everything properly. So like you only call next in like a success case scenario. If you have like a failure case, you would just like handle that. You would like do whatever you need to do, send the status code, send whatever response you want, and just return, just sort of like forget, like don't ever call next. That's totally fine as well. Okay, there's one last thing I'm going to do, and I'm actually going to define a value on REQ request. This is like what the express.json body parsing middleware does, something very similar for request.body. So I'm going to do REQ. I'm going to go like, what did I call it? It's going to copy what I did here. It's kind of arbitrary what you want to call this stuff, but something like this. Okay, so I'm going to create this auth property on REQ. And I'm going to put inside of that, I'm going to assign it to be an object. I'm going to put inside a value clerk user ID, and I'm going to map it to this decoder.sub thing, which if you remember from below, that was where the clerk user ID lived in the token, and the token decoded data. So what this means is, so I've got this function defined. I've got my middleware here complete. So this is sort of a complete Express middleware all laid out. One last thing I'm going to have to do down here to get this middleware to work. And just like these other middlewares up here, I've got to use the server.use method to set it up. So I'm going to go server.use, and I'm going to call this, what did I call it? Validate. Yeah, there we go. Okay, excellent. So now I've got my middleware all set up. Now this is going to run for every request that comes in, which is what we want. Okay. There's one last change I got to make down to my secret word, though. And that is I still need to have my clerk user ID. But now, instead of getting it from decoder.sub, I'm going to get it from req.auth.clerk user ID. So what does this all mean? Well, if you want to write another endpoint that accepts a token, you just can copy this like you don't have to like do all this token checking stuff. Like every endpoint will have this set up and you're good. So like you can just assume, okay, so if a user is making a request to this endpoint, like you just can get what user they are. Like it's just sort of like globally available on REQ. Which is kind of nice. Like it reduces the amount of boilerplate code you have to write for every endpoint. And it makes your application less complicated. So I'm going to save this and come back over here and reload. Everything still works the same. So I realize there's a bit of new stuff I talked about here, but any questions about that? Okay. So again, Max is going to go through this again. So this isn't the first time this isn't the last time you're going to see this. But yeah, this is a very common pattern in applications to have some sort of middleware layer that handles all of your auths. So you don't have to think about it for every request. You might also be wondering, wait a second, this is running for every request, which means that like now if I go to like localhost 8000, that's not going to work anymore. It's not going to give me OK true anymore because this is running for every request. So you might be wondering, like, how do you make it so that like this only applies to some and not all endpoints? And that's a really valid question. And there's a couple of different ways you can do this, but the way I like to do it is there is so instead of calling server.use is another way you can do middleware. You can actually take the middleware and you can put it as an argument in here. So you can apply it just to some requests. So if I did this now, so like I've commented this out, it's not being applied globally anymore. It's just being applied to this endpoint. I save this now and I reload this. This works now. But now we're back to our old behavior where secret word doesn't work anymore. So that's another thing you can do. This is actually the pattern I tend to use more often because I want more of that fine-grained control. But both are valid and both make sense in different contexts. Cool. Okay, that is all the code that I had prepared to talk about today. So we have maybe a little more time, but not a ton more time. So I have an exercise I was going to go through at the end where we'd sort of be able to like talk through what it would look like to build a more complicated application here. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that and maybe start writing it. So Max is going to kind of write this application with you next week, but he's going to use SQLize and some of the tools you maybe went over in the earlier part of this week. But I'm going to start maybe writing it. And we're going to see how long we go until either I get tired or everyone's like, okay, we gotta stop here. So this application is, I kind of alluded to it before, but a to-do list application. This is something you've written before earlier on in Careers in Code. But there's a way you can do this now that you know all this auth stuff. Like you can start to maybe think about how you could do this in a way where every user has their own list. You don't have one global list. And also that list is being managed on the server. It's not client only. So think about an app like Evernote or Google Keep, if you're familiar with those. Like those kinds of applications, they're storing all that to-do list information on the server. You have this application maybe on like your phone and on your computer. And you can do things like add an item on your computer and it'll show up on your phone. So what's going on there is the source of truth for all that information is a database somewhere. It's a big database table of to-do list items. So let's talk about a bit like how I might go about building something like that. So imagine you have a web application. And when someone visits the web application, you have to go through a very similar sort of workflow as to what happens in the application we set up. So a user is forced to log in when they immediately get to the root/route. and they log in, and then they're sort of dumped at like an endpoint, maybe like /todos after that. And that endpoint, that route on the front end, renders a list of to-do items. And it gets that list of to-do items by making a request to the server. So maybe it makes a request to like get /todos. So this is like a REST resource. There's a to-dos sort of item or resource that you're getting data from. So you maybe make a request to this endpoint, and you require a token. So because you logged in, you are able to get a token from that login workflow from Clerk, and you're able to like call that get token function we used earlier today. You're able to get that token. You're able to include that in the request, and you make that request to like get /todos with that token, and it gives you back a list of your to-do list items. So then you render those to the screen using React. Okay, cool. Let's say now there's a button at the bottom of the screen, or like a text box in the button, where like a user can type in there like their new to-do list items. So they type it into the box at the bottom, and they click add. So what does that do? So, I mean, of course, you've got your button, the text box on the page, and your text box is probably hooked up to some state. So you've got your text box, you've got that onChange handler. As you type into your text box, it'll take the data that's in that onChange handler, set it into the state on maybe like your state that you're using to manage the text box. You've got the value of the text box assigned to that state. So you've got that whole like one-way data flow thing going on. And then once the user presses that create button, that will then pull in that text I typed in the text box from the state, and will make a request. So it'll call get token to get another token for Clerk. It'll make a request to maybe like post /todos. Okay. And that body of that request will include your to-do text, or your text from your text box. And that request gets made to the server. It goes through the middleware. It checks to make sure the token's all set, everything's good. And what that will do is it'll run like an insert into like to-dos, and will add a new row into your to-dos table. That to-dos table probably will have like an ID, like maybe created by user ID, text, some data like that. And you probably also like you want to have something similar to what we did, where you have like a user table. So you've got a table for every user in your system. Okay, cool. So then after that comes back, that response comes back, then you could do a couple things. Locally, you could just like add that to your state, your big list of to-dos. So in the response you get back, you maybe return back to the client from the server, like your new to-do item. You add that into your big to-do list, and now it shows up in the list for the user. So that sort of interaction there, they've clicked add, and like after that request has gone to the server, you now see the new thing up on the screen. So we've gone through sort of that whole loop there, client through to the server, through the database, then all the way back. Cool. And please interrupt me if you have any questions. I'm just kind of like going through it here. So, okay, maybe there's some other things you want to do. Maybe you want to let the user complete to-do items. So maybe now you on every to-do item, you have that probably like a loop in React, or like looping through rendering every item in that to-do list. Maybe also now render a checkbox. And you set so it's like an input type checkbox. You set the checked prop on it to be whether like maybe there's a property on every to-do list item, so a row or sorry, a column in that database table called complete. And that complete maybe starts as false when you create new items. And what happens is when you click that checkbox, you've got an onChange handler on that checkbox. And what that does is it says, oh, okay, it changed. I'm going to get the checked value from the checkbox. And then you get another token from Clerk. You make a request. You make like a put to /todos / your to-do ID. So going back to that REST thing, you make a request to that endpoint. You send that token along with it. It goes sort of through the back end. It's able to say, oh, okay, that token, validate it, make sure that all looks good. And then you then update that to-do row to do like an update table set, like, or so I guess it'd be like update to-do set complete equals true, where ID equals the to-do ID you passed in the request, or the path, or something like that. So you do that kind of thing. You run that query, and then you send back the updated to-do back to the front end. Now you're able to like change that checkbox. So you've done that whole sort of cycle again there for that interaction. So what you're probably noticing here is every time you do a thing in the application, it's sort of going from front end to web server to database and all the way back up. And that's a very common thing you'll see with this sort of application, where there's a lot of sort of like everything, pretty much everything you're like you're informing the server of through a request, and the source of truth where that data lives is all on the server. So at any point, any client can make a request to the server and be like, okay, server, give me all my to-do list items. And the server will give you that list, and will always have a complete list of all those items. That's sort of the way you tend to build these systems. And then to sort of come full circle here, like adding that delete to that whole CRUD set of actions, like you could have a way you could delete a to-do list item. And maybe when you delete an item, you have like a little X icon to the right of the text box. You click that little X icon, and when you press it, it will like generate a token, make a request to the server to like /to-do/ID. It's like a delete. And same thing, the server validates the token, makes sure it's good, and then we'll run like a delete from, so it'd be like delete from to-do where ID equals the to-do ID. And then again, comes back to the front end, you're like, oh, okay, got back successful response. And then, yeah, then there you go. So Palash asks, will you be doing office hours? We can see this clerk auth process built in one of our capstones. That's a great question. I didn't ask Max if I should do office hours for this, but maybe I should. Yeah, I think let me reach out to Max. I'm available probably this weekend for like an hour or two, so if he wants me to do it, I can. I'll get back to you in Slack on that. Yeah, so one other thing I do want to quickly mention on this, if you all were able to kind of follow what I just went through there, I saw some eyes lighting up and some head shaking, so I'm assuming that at least there was some amount of understanding there. But one thing you've got to keep in mind with these systems is you need to only allow users to update and modify and view their data. So I sort of like spoke a few queries there off the top of my head. Like I said, like delete from to-do where ID equals to-do ID. But you would also in the real world have to do something like stick at the end and to-do.created by user ID is like the right user ID. You don't want to let a user delete someone else's to-do item. Stuff like that. So like this is where more of the security posture stuff comes in, where you have to think through some of these edge cases. And this is also where like in the real world, and maybe like a less toy example, you'd actually have like a whole test suite to go through this. You'd want to verify all these cases to make sure the system does what you want in all the different situations. So yeah, this is I think this is a pretty cool, this is a pretty good example of this to-do list application. It's one Max is going to touch on a bit more next week, because it's starting to get closer to more of like a real thing that you could actually see like someone using in the real world. So I guess any thoughts on what I just went through? And do you want me to try to start building this in some way? Or do you think that it would make more sense for Max to really take this on as one big lump? Okay. So Palash wants to see me build it. Let me do this. Let me start. The thing is like, if we had like 45 minutes to an hour, I think I could do it justice, but I don't know if I have the stamina to keep going for that long. I had a bit of a long day at work today. So I think I'm going to, let me get started. I think I can get enough of an MVP going where you can start to see how some of the things work. And I'll post the code when I'm done on GitHub. And if you either want to take it further, or maybe Max wants to like use it as a starting point, I don't know. Then maybe we can go from there. Or maybe if I'm doing office hours this weekend, I'll finish it up then. Okay. So this is going to be fun. Also, realize that I'm doing this totally off the cuff. So you're going to get to see raw unfiltered me write some code now. Okay, so I'm going to start in the database, because that's typically often a good place for these systems to start, is just to like think about how to model your data. Also, I'm going to build this in the same backend repository we've been working in here, just because to save some time. In practice, you probably go through the same steps of making a new project, initializing it, installing all the dependencies, doing everything from scratch. But we did that earlier today, so yeah, Palash.
Can you do me one favor and kind of like start with a relational database, like 2 tables? You can keep it like minimum, but like how
Yes. Yes. Yeah, we're gonna do that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make 2 tables, and it's gonna be a one-to-many. So what that means, I'm gonna have a user table, our clerk user table. I'm gonna just modify that a little bit. And I'm gonna add another table, and I'm gonna call it to-dos. Well, I'm gonna call it to-do. The whole idea of whether we call tables singular or plural is like controversial, but I'm gonna go singular for today. Okay, so I'm gonna close that. I'm gonna feel free to just watch. Like, I'm gonna be moving kind of fast here. Like, if you want to try to follow along, feel free, but I'm not gonna like wait up. Okay, I'm gonna just get rid of this table because I don't care. We're just gonna start from scratch here. Okay, so I'm gonna make 2 tables, clerk user and to do. So it's gonna let me do 2, and I'll just do them separately. Okay, so in my clerk user, I want ID and clerk ID. And I think I'm also gonna stick a name in here too, or username. Yeah, we'll do that. Just off the cuff here, like one other thing I'm doing is I'm naming my database columns in snake case, so with underscores, and not camel case with uppercase between words. I'm doing that very purposefully because SQL is not case sensitive. So if you write a database column like this, it's actually going to force you to put it in quotes everywhere you want to use it, and that gets really tedious. So I tend to prefer to not name them in camel case. Snake case is kind of my default for that reason. Okay, cool. So I'm going to run that. So we got our clerk user table, and now I'm going to add a to-do table. So my to-do table, I think I had the column that I used here. ID created by, okay, yeah. So that I'm going to do a created by user ID, and that's going to be, I think, an integer. And then I had text. And then complete. And that is a Boolean. Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I'm gonna run this. Okay, sweet. Cool. So that's our database. So notice that because I've got a foreign key on the to-do, that's the many side of the one-to-many. So like if we had a diagram, you'd have user here, and you have like a bunch of lines coming down from that with a bunch of to-dos. Okay, so now at this point, I'm going to go over into here, and then I'm going to add myself some REST resources. So I'm going to go app dot. Why are you auto-completing weirdly there? App.get to-dos. Okay, so I'm going to do something like, what was it? db.query, select star from to-do where, oh, actually, I also need my middleware too. I'm going to steal that. Stick that down. Oh, down there. Okay. So where ID equals, and then want actually, I'm gonna do this the easy way, but we could use a join like we talked about yesterday to do this. But I think you all had a bit of trouble holding on yesterday with that, so I'm gonna avoid that for now. I'm also gonna make this async because I just want to use async await, and I want to make things easy for myself here. Okay, so I need to get my user. So I'm going to go from clerk user, and I want the user ID, and I want it where our clerk ID is going to be request.auth.clerk user ID, something like that. Okay. And let me indent this a bit just so it's easier for me to see. Okay. So now I'm going to go call this raw user and do something like if raw user.rows.length is 0, then res status 404.send. Actually, in hindsight, I probably should have put this in the middleware too. Whatever, good enough for now. No user found for clerk ID rec auth clerk user ID. Something kind of like that. Return out of there. Okay, cool. So now should be able to go user raw user.rows 0.id, and this should be user ID, not user. Okay, so now I can go user ID down here. Okay, so select start from to do. Yep. Okay, so now I can go to dos, and this has got a stick and a wait in front of there. Okay, now I can go res.status 200 send. I'm going to stick my thing in a little wrapper object here, results to do, something kind of like that. Okay, excellent. So let's go check that out, see if that worked. Go over to here. Actually, I'll just reuse this. To-dos. Token probably expire. Oh, my server isn't running. That's an important one. Oh, app isn't defined. What did I do? Oh, it's server, not app. And my token. Yep. Okay. Let me get myself a new token here. I think I kept this log on, so I can just. Why did that happen? Oh yeah. That's right. That's gonna fail. Okay. Whatever. Doesn't matter for this right now. We're gonna get back to that in a second. Okay. So. Okay. And what's going on there? Localhost. Okay. Localhost refused to connect. Why is that? Oh, that's why. Oh yeah, because that crashed my thing. There we go. Okay. Where am I? Where am I? There we go. Okay. Invalid token. Oh, my token expired. Okay. Let's. What's going on here? Oh yeah. Okay. You know what I got to do? I've got a. Let's see. It's over in here. So what's going on right now is got the secret word endpoint I wrote. It's looking for that column's secret word, and that doesn't exist in my user table anymore. So it's sort of complaining and unable to figure out what's going on there. So I'm just going to have this return something static for now, just so I can just get by this. We're going to get rid of that endpoint in a second. Okay. And every time I was making a request, that was crashing my server, which is what the problem was.
We'll just
Okay.
adding a secret word column work in the beekeeper.
Yeah, that would work too, but I can't figure out in Beekeeper how to modify the table, so that was faster. It's probably not hard to do, but
Right.
it's not a tool I'm very familiar with.
Right.
Okay, excellent. That's good. So no user found, so we don't have a row in our database table for this user. So I'm just going to make one. Typically what you'd do is you'd have something that would make these automatically as new users get created. I'm not going to have time to cover that right now, but let's just pretend that one's in there for now just to get this working. So I am going to insert into clerk user clerk ID, user name, values. That's my clerk ID. And then I'll say, there we go. Okay, so now we should have that. Excellent. And my token's probably expired, but let's see. Yep, you see, these tokens don't last very long. That's one thing about Clerk that's kind of annoying. You've constantly got to generate new tokens. Like it's good for a security perspective, but oh yeah, it would help if I didn't do typos in my code. So I meant row user. Raw user. Yeah, there we go. Okay. That wasn't what I expected to get back. Rows, dot rows, that's why. So the result of a query, what I get back here, I actually want that dot rows property. There we go. Empty array of to-do items. Took me a second, we got there. Okay, let's let me also make an endpoint to add a new to-do item. Server post to-dos. So I'm going to use that validate middleware again. And I'm going to stick a quest handler at the end here. Okay, so for this, I'm going to steal the same code at the top. In practice, I'd probably actually put this code in the validate middleware as well, because it's kind of, I'm repeating it again, and I'm going to keep repeating it, but whatever, keeping it simple for now. So I've got my user ID. So now I'd do something like db query insert into clerk user clerk ID. Wait, not clerk user, to-dos, to-do. Where are my columns in this table again? ID created, okay, so created by user ID, text complete. So I want something like, this would be user ID, this would be text, which we're going to have to get from the body, and then complete starts as false. So result, something kind of like that. And then I would do something like status. So I'd return a 201 from this, because 201 means created. It's typically what you use in a REST sort of paradigm. And then I would do something like maybe result rows 0 should be that. Okay. I should also mention, I'm omitting a lot of stuff that typically you would include in a production grade system. There's no error handling in this, which is kind of like a big deal. You normally handle like your errors. If this throws an error, like it's going to crash the whole server. There's a lot of things I'm forgetting here, but we're just sort of like speed running through what you would need to make this work. Okay. We got to get that text value though. So what I'm going to do is something like text is going to be equal to request body text. And I'm going to just check to make sure it's a string. And if it's not a string, I'm going to give 400 and go like error. The text key in the body is not a string. This is not allowed. Something kind of like that. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Let's try out that endpoint. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to post. I'm going to make my body be raw, make it JSON. That's going to add the proper headers in. And I'm going to go text my to do, or how about this? Finish teaching. And then I should be able to click send. It's probably going to complain about my token expiring again. So let me get me a new token value here. Okay. So over here, I'll go bearer, paste. Okay, so I got back a 201. Looks like I didn't get anything back in the response, which is a little bit concerning, but whatever. Now if I made a get to to-dos, I've got my item in there. Okay, so we just built a little REST API. Let's sort of hook this up to a web app and start to be able to do some stuff in the web. So jumping over to that, I'm just going to add this again into this application. I normally would do this in like a separate application, but just trying to make good use of time here. So I'm going to do something like div class name of to-dos. And then I'm going to stick up here something like a to-dos set to-dos use state, like an empty array or something like that. I'm going to do like a use effect here. And then I'll actually use this as an opportunity to show you the async await for this kind of thing, since I forgot to do that. So I'm going to make a function in here. I'm going to call it like run, make it an async function. And then I'll run this there. You can't actually make an effect async. I don't know if Max covered that, but that's not allowed because you can return a function from the effect, like to clean it up. And if it's an async function, it's going to return a promise from the function, and that's not allowed. So you can't use an async function directly. So you got to do it this way. It's kind of goofy, just how it works. Okay, so now in here, I'm going to go token is equal to await get token, and then I can fetch HTTP localhost 8000 / to-dos. I can await that, and then in here I got to stick my headers. Something kind of like that. Then I'm going to check to see if actually I'm just going to steal this from above. Okay, yeah, that should be good. Okay, and then that to-dos JSON result, was it results plural or results singular? Results plural. Okay, so getting my token, making a request including my token, checking to make sure that it worked successfully, and if it did, getting the JSON data, setting that into my state. And this is going to run when the component mounts. Okay, cool. So we got it up here. So now I'm going to do something like down here, go to-dos, map to-do. And then for each to-do item, I'm going to render a div. And I'm going to give it like a class name of to-do with a key of to-do.id, because we got that primary key in our table. And then in here, I want to do something like maybe render, I don't know, it was like to-do.text, like that. I'm actually going to go to-do.id - to-do.text. Okay, cool. So if I save this, finish teaching. Yeah, excellent. Okay. So now let me come over to here. I'm going to make this actually a UL and LI because it's a list, and that's how lists are supposed to work. Cool. So now I got our little bulleted list thing. Let's add a way we can create a new to-do list item. So down here, I'm going to make a div. I'm going to call, actually, I'll just do a input type text. So in here, I need to have something up here like a new to-do text value, maybe. Set new to-do text value. Okay, so then in here, I would do something like value is new to-do, there we go. And then So I'm assuming this sort of pattern is probably pretty familiar to you at this point. Okay, placeholder, I meant placeholder. Gosh, something like clean the car. That's something people clean. Kitchen. I like that more. Okay. So if I stick that down there, we got our text box down there. Excellent. So now I'm going to add a button here. And my button's going to be create new item. Cool. It's going to render it in line. Didn't mean for it to do that, but that's kind of what I want anyway. Great. So I'm going to, in here, go like on click. And then on my on click handler, I want to do kind of something similar to what I did above here. So I'm going to make this async because I'm, again, want to use async await. As much as I like strayed away from async await before, like I just almost always use it actually. Like it's really tedious to do all the dot thens over and over. Like it really is tedious. So there's a certain amount of complexity that's just, it's like impossible to really be able to do with the dot thens. It just gets like way too hard to follow in my experience. Okay, so token, get token. You call this get token function quite a bit when you use Clerk. Response is going to be fetch HTTP ://localhost 8000 / to-dos. So in this case, I want to do a method of post. I want to do headers of authorization, bearer, and then token. And then I also want to do content type application JSON because I'm going to be sending JSON, and also accept application application. There we go. Such a long word. And then I want body here to be JSON.stringify of to do or wait, was it text? That's what it was. New to do text value, that thing. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to copy my thing from up here and then stick that down here. Okay, and I'm going to create new item. Okay, and then once I've gotten back my response, so one thing actually I did wanted to verify here was my server before wasn't giving me back my data, and that was a little bit concerning. You know what it is? Because insert doesn't return it. Yeah, so insert's not going to give you back the data to inserted, so I'm going to do it this way. Wait, does it not give you back the data to inserted? Maybe I'm wrong about that. Here's what I'm going to do. I need to check. So I'm just going to log out result. And then, yep, my server restarted. Take this token. I'm going to make a new item and just verify and see what data I get back. Make sure that like I'm not missing something. Because this to maybe bring it back here, the issue was when I made a post before, the body I got back was an empty string. And that wasn't what I expected it to be. I expected to have like the representation, like this sort of thing in there. And it's a little concerning. So that's how I want my system to work here. Oh, I want that there. There we go. Okay. Did I screw that up? Let's see here. What did I do here? That looks right to me. I was getting invalid token. Oh yeah, so it should be giving me a, oh, expired. That's why. These tokens just expire so fast. It's like really kind of a problem. Okay. So what did it log out here? Insert, row count, fields. Yeah, it's not going to give it to me. I don't
Is
like
it-
that. Oh, yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Yeah, like in the SQL it has insert into to do, and shouldn't it be like to do is the name? Is that the name of your table?
Yeah, the name of my table is to do.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't make it plural. You can go either way. There's sort of pros and cons to both approaches. But yeah, so that's okay. We're gonna do something else instead because I don't want to spend time troubleshooting this. Normally, I would troubleshoot this because this is like you really want to get back the data you're doing, but we're gonna work around it because that's kind of the name of the game right now. So I am going to instead, after we do this, I'm going to just fetch this data again, just like refetch the whole list. Yeah, I think that works for me. Okay, so refetch the whole list because the response of the post is garbage right now. Frowny face. Oh, wait. There we go. See you, Natasha. No problem. If you folks have to drop, we're just beyond at this point. You're welcome to. But hopefully I'll make it for an office hours. Okay. So I gotta update this variable here. I gotta I'll just read. Nah, I'm gonna change it. Get response. Get response. Get response. Yeah, something like that. Okay, cool. So now, if I did everything right, this is one of those things where we've set up all the dominoes. Now we get to see if it worked. So I'm gonna be like testing 1, 2, 3, and click create, and it didn't work. Okay, why didn't that work? It made the request. That's good. That's definitely good. Okay, and yep, it logged it out. Okay, so it looks like my second request didn't work for some reason. Why is that? Let's see. Okay. Get response, get response. Results. Yeah, it showed up in my database. That's good. So it looks like it's an issue between the database. It looks like it's an issue in this code then. Where is it? This code. Oh, because yeah, I think I see. Wait, raw user. Clerk user. Should be 1. Yeah, okay. So let's make sure. Actually, here's what else I can do. If I refresh this, is it? No, okay. So user ID, log that out to make sure that I'm not doing a very good job of explaining what I'm doing right now. So hopefully this is helpful, but if not, feel free to ask questions.
I can still join the dots, honestly. That the front end is probably just being a little wonky right now.
Yeah, it's honestly it's bugging me. This should work. I got to figure it out now. Yeah, okay, 1, that's right. And select star from to do where ID is 1. Oh, is the problem that this is in quotes? That shouldn't matter, I don't think. Yeah, Shouldn't matter. Where was I over here? Okay. If I run this query over here, does this work?
Mhm.
Let's see. Yeah, that only gives me one. Why does that only give me one? Oh, that is okay. That was a stupid error. This shouldn't be ID. This should be created by user ID. I'm not looking for the to do with ID of one. I'm looking for all the to do's created by user of ID one. So if I go created by user ID, yeah, there we go. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so created by user ID. I save that. Now I go over here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now if I go foo, yeah, it works now.
Awesome,
Cool.
awesome.
So
Thank
I think that's as far as I'm going to take it. But
yeah,
we did the read, we did the create. You could probably extrapolate the rest of it.
it's good. This is all on video too, right?
It is, and I'll put this up somewhere. I don't know where yet. Cool.
No problem. Thank you for bearing through this.
Yeah, for sure. I'll post in Slack if I'm going to do office hours. I'm not sure yet, but if so, see you then. If not, see you in the future at some point. Bye, folks. Have a good evening.
Bye, Ryan.